The whispers followed Harriet Mason like shadows through the dusty streets of Willow Creek, Nebraska Territory. 1874 cruel words that stung worse than the prairie wind. At 22, she'd long ago accepted what everyone said, that her unremarkable features and gangly frame made her too plain for any man to notice, let alone love. Harriet hurried along the wooden boardwalk, her arms laden with parcels from Mr. Wilson's general store. The spring sun beat down relentlessly as she tried to ignore the tittering laughter of Violet Richardson and her friends lounging outside the millinery shop. "My goodness, look at poor Harriet," Violet said, not bothering to lower her voice. "That dress makes her look like a fence post with sleeves." Harriet clutched her packages tighter, willing herself not to cry. Her simple brown dress sewn by her own hands was practical rather than pretty, just like her. Not that it mattered. In a town where eligible bachelors were as scarce as rain in August, even the beautiful girls struggled to find husbands. For someone like her, marriage seemed as distant as the mountains on the horizon. "Miss Mason," the voice belonged to Mrs. Peterson, the postmistress who waved frantically from the doorway of the post office. "A letter came for your father. Looks important government seal." Harriet nodded gratefully, relieved for the excuse to escape Violet's barbed comments. Her father, Dr. Edward Mason, was Willow Creek's only physician. Any official correspondence likely concerned his practice. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson." Harriet took the envelope and added it to her stack of parcels. The walk home took her past the saloon, a place respectable women avoided. Today, however, an unusual commotion spilled into the street men gathering around what appeared to be newcomers to town. Harriet quickened her pace, keeping her eyes down as she always did. "Easy there, miss." The collision nearly sent her packages flying. Strong hands steadied her shoulders, preventing what would have been an embarrassing tumble into the dirt. Harriet looked up, an apology ready on her lips, and found herself staring into the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen. The stranger towered over her, his broad shoulders blocking the sun. He wore the practical garb of a working cowboy, dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a faded red bandana at his neck, and a weather-beaten Stetson pushed back on his head. His face was tanned and weathered, with several days' worth of dark stubble on his jaw. "I'm terribly sorry," Harriet stammered, taking a step back. "I wasn't watching where no harm done," he replied, his voice carrying a slight drawl that marked him as not from Nebraska. "Let me help you with those." Before she could protest, he relieved her of several packages, arranging them more securely in her arms. His fingers brushed against hers, sending an unfamiliar flutter through her chest. "Thank you, but I can manage," Harriet said, avoiding his gaze. Men like him, handsome, confident cowboys, never paid attention to women like her, except out of pity or politeness. "I insist," he said, not relinquishing the largest parcel. "Where are you headed?" "The doctor's house. It's my father's practice." Harriet gestured vaguely down the street. "It's not far." "Perfect. I was planning to pay the doctor a visit anyway." The cowboy fell into step beside her. "Name's Flynn Blackwood, just rode in with the cross-T outfit." Harriet stole a glance at him. "The cattle drive from Texas. Father mentioned you might be arriving soon." Flynn nodded. 2,000 head of longhorns for the railroad. I'm trail boss this season." He said it without pride, just stating a fact. "And you are Harriet Mason." A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "The doctor's daughter. I've heard he's the best physician between Omaha and Denver." Harriet felt a rush of pride. "He is. He trained at Harvard Medical School before coming west." "And what about you, Miss Mason, born and raised in Willow Creek?" The personal question caught her off guard. Most people in town had known her all her life and rarely showed interest in anything about her. "Yes, though father hopes I might attend college back east someday. He believes women should be educated." She hesitated, wondering if she'd said too much. Many men found the idea of educated women threatening. To her surprise, Flynn nodded approvingly. "Smart man, your father. My sister's studying to be a teacher in St. Louis. Says it's the hardest thing she's ever done, but worth every minute." They turned onto Sycamore Street, where the doctor's house stood, a 2-story white clapboard with green shutters and a wide porch. The front portion served as the medical practice, while the family lived in the rear and upstairs. "This is us," Harriet said, suddenly reluctant to end their conversation. It was the longest exchange she'd had with a male stranger in years. Flynn handed back her parcels as they approached the gate. "Thank you for the company, Miss Mason. You said you needed to see my father." Harriet pushed open the gate. "One of my men took a bad fall yesterday. Nothing broken, I don't think, but he's in considerable pain. Father should be finished with Mrs. Gunderson's appointment by now. Please come in." Harriet led Flynn through the front door into the small waiting room. It was empty, which meant her father was between patients. She placed her packages on a side table and called out, "Father, there's someone here to see you." Dr. Mason emerged from his examination room, wiping his hands on a clean towel. At 54, he remained a handsome man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. His face brightened at the sight of his daughter. "Harriet, perfect timing. Mrs. Gunderson just left," he stopped, noticing Flynn. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Dr. Mason." "Flynn Blackwood, doctor. I'm with the Cross T outfit." The men shook hands as Harriet explained Flynn's situation. Dr. Mason nodded gravely. "Of course. Where is your injured man now?" "At our camp by the creek. Name's Charlie Williams. 19 years old and too proud to admit how much he's hurting. I'll gather my bag and come straight away." Dr. Mason turned to Harriet. "Would you mind preparing some of those pain powders while I get ready, and perhaps a jar of the arnica salve, of course, Father, as doctor." Mason disappeared into his office. Harriet became acutely aware of Flynn's presence in the small waiting room. He stood examining the medical diagrams on the wall, seeming genuinely interested. "Your father has quite a collection of books," Flynn observed, gesturing to the bookcase filled with medical texts. "Does he let you read them?" The question surprised her. "Yes, in fact he encourages it. I help with his patient records and sometimes assist with simple procedures." Flynn turned to face her fully, studying her with those intense blue eyes. "You're not what I expected, Miss Mason." Harriet felt her cheeks warm. "What do you mean? Most women I've met would faint at the mention of medical procedures. You speak about them like..." "Well, like someone who understands their importance. Father believes in practical knowledge, and someone needs to help him. We haven't had a proper nurse since Mrs. Abernathy moved to Kansas City last year." Flynn leaned against the doorframe, his posture relaxed but respectful. "How long will the cattle drive stay in Willow Creek?" Harriet asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "About a week. Time enough to rest the herd and the men before the final push to the railhead at Grand Island." He tilted his head slightly. "The town's holding a social on Saturday night, I hear. Will you be attending?" Before Harriet could respond, her father returned with his medical bag. "Ready when you are, Mr. Blackwood." Flynn straightened, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "Thank you for your help, Miss Mason. I hope to see you again soon." After they left, Harriet stood motionless in the waiting room, replaying their conversation. Had Flynn Blackwood, the handsome trail boss, actually shown interest in her? No, she decided. He was simply being polite. Men like him always had their pick of beautiful women like Violet Richardson with her golden curls and perfect figure. Not plain, awkward Harriet Mason with her unruly brown hair and freckled nose. Still, as she sorted her father's medical supplies, she couldn't help wondering what it might be like to attend the social with someone like Flynn Blackwood. The next morning dawned clear and warm. Harriet rose early as usual to help Mrs. Collins, their housekeeper, prepare breakfast before her father's first patients arrived at 8 o'clock. As she moved around the kitchen, her mind kept returning to Flynn Blackwood. Something about his direct gaze and easy manner had unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. "You're mighty distracted this morning," Mrs. Collins observed, watching Harriet nearly pour coffee into the sugar bowl. "Something troubling you, child?" "No, nothing at all." Harriet corrected her mistake quickly. "Just thinking about father's patients." Mrs. Collins, a widow who had worked for the Masons since Harriet's mother died of influenza 12 years ago, gave her a knowing look. "Wouldn't have anything to do with that handsome cowboy who came calling yesterday, would it?" Heat flooded Harriet's face. "He wasn't calling on me. He needed father's help for an injured man." Mrs. Collins nodded, unconvinced. And I suppose that's why he kept looking at you instead of the doctor. He did not, Harriet protested, but the older woman's words sent a small thrill through her. Had Flynn really been watching her? The back door opened, and Dr. Mason entered, looking weary but satisfied. He'd spent several hours at the cattle drives camp the previous evening. "How is the young cowboy?" Harriet asked, pouring her father a cup of coffee. "Young Mr. Williams, he'll mend." Badly bruised ribs and a sprained wrist, but nothing broken. Dr. Mason accepted the coffee gratefully. That Mr. Blackwood runs a tight outfit, well-organized camp, men seem to respect him. He's young for a trail boss, can't be more than 30. Harriet tried to appear only casually interested. "Where is he from originally?" "Texas, I believe, near San Antonio." Dr. Mason sipped his coffee. "Educated man, too. We had quite a discussion about the new medical techniques being developed back east." He glanced at Harriet over his spectacles. "He asked about you." The coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "Me, whatever for? Wanted to know if you were spoken for." Dr. Mason's eyes twinkled. "I told him you weren't, but that any young man would need to prove himself worthy of my daughter." "Father," Harriet gasped, mortified, "you didn't really say that." "I most certainly did." He reached across the table to pat her hand. "You're too valuable to waste on just any fellow who comes along." Mrs. Collins placed a plate of eggs and bacon before the doctor. "Well, I think it's high time someone noticed our Harriet for the treasure she is. That Violet Richardson may have pretty curls, but she hasn't got half the sense or kindness." Harriet shook her head, embarrassed by their praise. Mr. Blackwood was simply being polite. Cowboys passing through town always flirt with local girls. It means nothing. "Perhaps," her father conceded. "Though he didn't strike me as the flirtatious type. Rather serious, actually." The conversation shifted to Dr. Mason's patients for the day, but Harriet's thoughts remained on Flynn. Why would someone like him inquire about her? It made no sense. Men in Willow Creek had been overlooking her for years. After breakfast, Harriet donned a clean apron and prepared for her morning duties. Wednesdays were busy at the practice, with farmers and townspeople coming in for everything from tooth extractions to chronic ailments. She was organizing patient files when the bell above the front door jingled. Expecting Mrs. Timmons for her weekly treatment for rheumatism, Harriet was startled to find Flynn Blackwood standing in the waiting room, hat in hand. "Good morning, Miss Mason." His voice was as warm as she remembered. "Mr. Blackwood," Harriet smoothed her apron nervously, "is your man worse? Father's with a patient, but Charlie's doing fine thanks to your father." Flynn took a step closer. "Actually, I came to see you." Harriet blinked, certain she'd misheard. "Me. I was wondering if you might be willing to show me around town. Being trail boss means I need to know where to get supplies, which merchants are fair, that sort of thing." He offered a slight smile. "Of course, if you're too busy." "No," the word came out too quickly. Harriet took a breath to compose herself. "I mean, I'd be happy to help. Father's seeing patients until noon, but I could spare an hour now if that suits you." Flynn's smile widened. "That would be perfect." Harriet hurriedly explained to Mrs. Collins that she would be stepping out briefly. The housekeeper's knowing look made her blush again as she removed her apron and reached for her shawl. Outside, the morning sun bathed Willow Creek in golden light. Harriet felt strangely self-conscious walking beside Flynn down Main Street. She could feel curious stares from townspeople unused to seeing plain Harriet Mason in the company of a handsome stranger. "Your town seems prosperous," Flynn observed as they passed the newly constructed bank building. "It's grown considerably in recent years." "The railroad coming through changed everything." Harriet pointed out Wilson's general store. "Mr. Wilson's prices are fair and he carries quality goods. For leatherwork, Mr. Schmidt's harness shop is the best." As they continued their tour, Flynn asked thoughtful questions about the town and its people. He listened attentively to her answers, seeming genuinely interested in what she had to say. No man had ever paid such close attention to her words before. They passed the millinery shop where, inevitably, Violet Richardson and her friends were gathered. Violet's eyebrows shot up at the sight of Harriet with the striking cowboy. She immediately straightened her posture and patted her golden curls. "Why, hello there." Violet called out, ignoring Harriet completely and fixing her bright smile on Flynn. You must be with the cattle drive. I'm Violet Richardson. My father owns the bank. Flynn tipped his hat politely but didn't slow his pace. Madam, Flynn Blackwood, Miss Mason is kindly showing me around town. Violet's smile faltered slightly. Harriet? Well, isn't that charitable of her? Her gaze slid dismissively over Harriet. Though if you want to know where the real society is in Willow Creek, you should join us at the Henderson Ranch on Friday. We're having a small gathering before the town social. Thank you for the invitation, but I'll be busy with my men. Flynn placed his hand lightly on Harriet's elbow, guiding her forward. Miss Mason has been most helpful. As they walked away, Harriet could feel Violet's incredulous stare boring into her back. She waited for Flynn to make some comment about Violet's beauty. Men always did, but he simply asked about the livery stable they were approaching. That was Violet Richardson, Harriet finally said, unable to contain her curiosity. She's considered the most beautiful girl in Willow Creek. Flynn glanced back briefly. Is she? I hadn't noticed. Harriet studied his face for signs of teasing but found none. Everyone notices Violet. I was rather focused on our conversation. He stopped walking and turned to face her directly. You know, Miss Mason, you have the most interesting way of describing things. You see details others might miss. The compliment caught her off guard. Thank you. Growing up as the doctor's daughter, I suppose I learned to observe carefully. It's a valuable skill. Flynn resumed walking. Now, tell me about this social on Saturday. What should a Texas cowboy expect from a Nebraska town gathering? By the time they completed their tour and returned to the doctor's house, Harriet felt oddly comfortable in Flynn's presence. His easy manner and thoughtful questions had drawn her out of her usual reserve. For the first time in years, she'd spoken freely without constantly monitoring her words or worrying about judgment. At the gate, Flynn paused. Thank you for your time, Miss Mason. You've been more helpful than you know. It was my pleasure, Mr. Blackwood. He seemed about to say something more when Dr. Mason appeared on the porch. Mr. Blackwood, I was hoping to catch you. I'd like to check on young Charlie this afternoon if that's convenient. Of course, Doctor. Anytime you can spare. As Flynn tipped his hat and departed, Harriet couldn't help watching him go. His tall figure moved with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He seems quite taken with you, her father commented as they walked inside together. Don't be silly, Father. He was just being polite, Doctor. Mason gave her a sidelong glance. Harriet, I've been a doctor long enough to recognize symptoms when I see them. That young man has all the signs of a fellow who's found something or someone of great interest. Harriet shook her head, refusing to allow hope to take root. Hope only led to disappointment, something she'd learned too well over the years. For the rest of the day, Harriet threw herself into her work, assisting her father and organizing his medical supplies. Yet Flynn's face kept appearing in her mind, those startling blue eyes, the way the corners crinkled when he smiled, how he'd listened so intently to her words. By evening, she'd convinced herself that she'd imagined his interest. Men like Flynn Blackwood didn't court plain, ordinary women like her. Tomorrow, he'd probably be escorting Violet Richardson around town, just like every other eligible man who passed through Willow Creek. Still, as she prepared for bed that night, Harriet found herself standing longer than usual before her small mirror. Her reflection showed what it always did: an unremarkable young woman with brown hair pulled back in a practical style, hazel eyes too large for her face, and a sprinkling of freckles across her nose and cheeks. Not ugly, certainly, but not beautiful either, just plain. She turned away from the mirror with a sigh. Better to forget Flynn Blackwood entirely than to nurture foolish dreams. Morning came too soon, sunlight streaming through Harriet's curtains as roosters announced the new day. She dressed quickly in her blue work dress, one of her 3 everyday gowns, all sewn by her own hand. After arranging her hair in its usual simple style, she hurried downstairs to help with breakfast. Mrs. Collins was already busy at the stove, humming a cheerful tune. Good morning, dear. There's fresh coffee. Thank you. Harriet poured herself a cup, noticing her father's absence. Has father already left? Called out at dawn to the Miller farm. Their youngest has a high fever. Mrs. Collins slid a plate of flapjacks onto the table. Said he might not be back until afternoon, so you're to manage any patients who come in. Harriet nodded. This wasn't unusual. She often handled minor complaints and organized appointments when her father was away. After breakfast, she tidied the kitchen and prepared the examination room, restocking bandages and checking medicine supplies. The morning passed quietly with only 2 patients: Mr. Dawson for his monthly heart tonic, and little Sarah Jenkins to have a splinter removed from her finger. Harriet was recording these visits in her father's ledger when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up to find Flynn Blackwood standing in the doorway, a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. "Good morning, Miss Mason." He seemed almost nervous, shifting his weight slightly. "I hope I'm not intruding." Harriet stood quickly, nearly knocking over the inkwell. "Mr. Blackwood, no, not at all." She gestured to the empty waiting room. "As you can see, we're not exactly overwhelmed with patients." Flynn smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing. "I picked these on my ride this morning." He extended the wildflowers, a colorful collection of prairie blooms. "They reminded me of you." Harriet accepted them with trembling fingers. No one had ever brought her flowers before. "They're beautiful, thank you." "Like you," he said quietly. She glanced up sharply, certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon, the flowers. Beautiful like you." Flynn met her gaze directly, no hint of teasing in his expression. "I wanted to ask if you might consider accompanying me to the social on Saturday night." Harriet stared at him, struggling to comprehend what was happening. This handsome, intelligent man was asking to escort her plain Harriet Mason to a public event. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Flynn's brow furrowed. "Why am I asking you?" "Yes." Harriet clutched the flowers tighter. "There are plenty of lovely girls in town who would be thrilled to go with you. Violet Richardson, for instance." A look of genuine confusion crossed Flynn's face. "Miss Richardson doesn't interest me, you do. But I'm—" Harriet faltered, embarrassed to speak the word that had followed her for years. "You're what?" Flynn prompted gently. "Plain," she finally said, the word barely audible. "Everyone says so." Something flickered in Flynn's eyes, anger perhaps, though not directed at her. He took a step closer. "Harriet Mason," he said, his voice low and intense, "you are the most beautiful woman I've seen in all my travels." She caught her breath, searching his face for signs of mockery or pity. Finding none, she whispered, "You can't mean that." "I never say things I don't mean." Flynn reached out slowly, as if afraid she might bolt, and touched her cheek with gentle fingers. "Your eyes change color with your thoughts: green when you're curious, gold when you're amused. You have a mind that sees beyond surfaces. And when you smile, truly smile, not the polite one you give strangers, it transforms your entire face." Tears pricked at Harriet's eyes. No one had ever described her that way before. She'd been defined by what she lacked: beauty, grace, charm, never by what she possessed. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say you'll come to the social with me." Flynn's hand dropped back to his side. "Give me the chance to prove I'm a man of my word." The door behind them opened, and Mrs. Collins entered with a basket of clean linens. She stopped short at the sight of Flynn, her eyes widening in surprised delight. "Oh, Mr. Blackwood, isn't it? How nice to see you again." Her gaze fell on the wildflowers in Harriet's hands, and a knowing smile spread across her face. "I'll just put these away and leave you two to your conversation." After Mrs. Collins bustled into the back room, Harriet found her voice. "Yes," she said softly. "I would be honored to accompany you to the social." Flynn's smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. "Saturday at 7 then." "I'll come to escort you." After he left, Harriet stood motionless in the waiting room, the wildflowers clutched to her chest. Part of her feared this was all an elaborate joke, that Flynn would laugh about it later with his cowboy friends, or worse, simply not appear on Saturday night. But a tiny seed of hope had taken root in her heart. What if he meant what he said? What if, to him, she truly was beautiful? The possibility was too precious, too fragile to examine too closely. Instead, she busied herself finding a jar for the wildflowers, arranging them carefully on her father's desk, where the afternoon sun would catch their colors. By the time Dr. Mason returned from the Miller farm, Harriet had convinced herself that Flynn's visit had been a dream. But her father noticed the flowers immediately. "Those are lovely. A gift from Mr. Blackwood, I presume?" Harriet's surprise must have shown on her face, for he chuckled. I ran into him on my way back to town. He mentioned he'd asked you to the social and seemed quite pleased with himself. You're not opposed? Harriet asked hesitantly. Dr. Mason removed his spectacles and polished them thoughtfully. Opposed to my daughter being courted by a respectable, intelligent man who clearly admires her. Why would I be? Because he'll be leaving soon. The cattle drive moves on next week. True. Her father replaced his spectacles. But something tells me Mr. Blackwood isn't the type of man to start something he doesn't intend to finish. Besides, Grand Island is only a day's ride by train, not so far if a man is properly motivated. The thought that Flynn might want to continue seeing her after the cattle drive departed sent a flutter of excitement through Harriet's chest. Now, Dr. Mason said, changing the subject, tell me about our patients this morning. The next 2 days passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Word spread quickly through Willow Creek that Harriet Mason Plain, quiet Harriet, would be attending the social with the handsome trail boss from Texas. Reactions ranged from disbelief to envy to outright mockery. Violet Richardson made a point of stopping by the doctor's office on Friday morning, ostensibly to have a minor cut on her finger examined. Is it true you're going to the social with Mr. Blackwood? She asked, as Harriet wrapped a small bandage around her perfectly manicured finger. Yes, Harriet replied simply, focusing on her task. Violet gave a tinkling laugh. How? Unexpected. I suppose he feels obligated after your father treated his cowhand. Men of his stature often perform such charitable acts. The barb struck its intended target, but Harriet refused to show her pain. There, all finished. The cut is very shallow. It should heal quickly. Violet examined the bandage with a critical eye. I heard Mr. Blackwood turned down invitations from several young ladies in town. Even Rebecca Henderson, and her father owns the largest ranch in the county. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Between us, I think he's playing some sort of game. Men like that enjoy toying with provincial girls before moving on. Harriet met Violet's gaze steadily. Thank you for your concern, Miss Richardson. Was there anything else you needed? Violet's pretty face hardened momentarily before she forced another smile. No, that will be all. I do hope you won't be too disappointed when this little adventure ends. After she left, Harriet allowed herself a moment of doubt. Was Violet right? Was Flynn's interest merely a passing fancy or worse, some kind of cruel joke? She was still contemplating this possibility when Flynn himself appeared at the door later that afternoon. He looked different, freshly shaved, his dark hair neatly trimmed, wearing a clean white shirt under his vest rather than his usual trail clothes. Miss Mason. He removed his hat, revealing hair still damp from washing. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. Harriet gestured for him to enter. Father's just finishing with a patient. Flynn nodded but made no move to sit. Instead, he said, I've heard some talk in town about us. Harriet's heart sank. I see. No, I don't think you do. Flynn stepped closer, his expression serious. Miss Richardson has been telling anyone who'll listen that I'm only escorting you out of pity or obligation. Heat rushed to Harriet's face, embarrassment mingled with shame that he'd heard such things. Mr. Blackwood, if you wish to withdraw your invitation, I would understand completely. Withdraw it, Flynn looked genuinely shocked. That's the last thing I want. He took her hand gently in his. Harriet, if I may call you that, I asked you to the social because I want to spend time with you, not out of pity, not out of obligation. But because in the short time I've known you, I've found you to be the most fascinating, genuine person I've met in years of traveling. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Harriet felt something tight inside her chest begin to loosen. People in town, they've always seen me a certain way. It's hard to believe someone might see me differently. Then allow me to prove it to you. Flynn squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Tomorrow night, and perhaps you might do me the honor of saving me the first dance. Harriet nodded, unable to speak past the lump forming in her throat. Flynn seemed to understand her silence, offering a warm smile before departing with a promise to see her the following evening. After he left, Harriet pressed her hands to her warming cheeks. For the first time in her life, she found herself caring deeply about her appearance. The brown dress she'd planned to wear to the social suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. As if reading her thoughts, Mrs. Collins appeared beside her. "You know, I've been saving that blue fabric we bought last month for a special occasion. If we start now, we could have a new dress ready by tomorrow evening." Harriet turned to the older woman with grateful eyes. "Do you really think we could? Child, I was the finest seamstress in Cincinnati before I married Mr. Collins." Mrs. Collins rolled up her sleeves determinedly. "Between the two of us, we'll create something that will make that handsome cowboy of yours forget his own name." Saturday morning dawned clear and perfect. Harriet and Mrs. Collins had worked late into the night, cutting and stitching by lamplight. The result was hanging now from her wardrobe door a cornflower blue gown with a fitted bodice and gracefully flowing skirt. Simple compared to Violet's elaborate dresses, but elegantly flattering to Harriet's slender figure. As evening approached, Mrs. Collins helped Harriet dress, then stepped back to admire their handiwork. "Oh my," she breathed, her eyes misting. "You look absolutely beautiful." Harriet turned to her small mirror and hardly recognized herself. The blue fabric brought out golden highlights in her hazel eyes, while the cut of the bodice accentuated her narrow waist. Instead of her usual severe hairstyle, Mrs. Collins had arranged her brown locks in soft waves, with small blue flowers tucked among the curls. "Is it really me?" Harriet whispered, touching the glass as if to confirm the reflection was real. "It's always been you, dear." Mrs. Collins adjusted one of the flowers. "We've just helped the outside match the beauty that's always been within." A knock at the front door sent Harriet's heart racing. "Doctor." Mason called up the stairs. "Harriet, your escort has arrived." With one final glance in the mirror, Harriet gathered her courage and descended the staircase, one hand trailing lightly on the banister. At the bottom stood Flynn, looking more handsome than ever in a dark suit, crisp white shirt, and neatly tied cravat. His eyes widened as she appeared, his lips parting slightly in evident surprise. Dr. Mason watched the wordless exchange with twinkling eyes. "Mr. Blackwood seems to have lost the power of speech, Harriet. I believe that's a favorable sign." Flynn recovered quickly. "Miss Mason, you look." He paused, searching for adequate words. "Breathtaking." The sincerity in his voice made Harriet blush deeply. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." After receiving her father's good-natured warnings about returning at a reasonable hour, Flynn offered Harriet his arm and escorted her outside where a handsome buggy waited. "I borrowed it from Mr. Henderson," Flynn explained, helping her up. "Thought it would be more comfortable than horseback." The town hall was already bustling with activity when they arrived. Lanterns illuminated the entrance, and the sounds of fiddle music and laughter spilled into the evening air. Harriet felt a momentary panic as heads turned to watch them enter together. She was used to attending such events with her father or alone, usually sitting quietly in a corner while others danced. Flynn must have sensed her nervousness, for he placed his hand reassuringly over hers where it rested on his arm. "Shall we show them how it's done in Texas?" he murmured. His confidence bolstered her courage. Harriet lifted her chin and walked beside him into the hall, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed them. The hall had been transformed with bunting and flowers. Tables laden with food and punch lined one wall, while the center had been cleared for dancing. The local musicians, 3 fiddlers, a banjo player, and an enthusiastic pianist were already in full swing. Violet Richardson stood with her usual admirers near the refreshment table. Her smile faltered visibly when she spotted Harriet on Flynn's arm. For once, Harriet didn't feel the sting of Violet's judgment. Something about Flynn's steady presence beside her made other people's opinions seem suddenly less important. "Would you care to dance?" Flynn asked as the musicians struck up a lively tune. Harriet hesitated. "I should warn you, I'm not very accomplished. Fortunate, then, that I am." Flynn's blue eyes sparkled with humor. "Just follow my lead." He guided her onto the dance floor with easy confidence. Harriet had expected to feel awkward and self-conscious, but Flynn's sure steps and gentle guidance made dancing feel natural. As they whirled around the floor, she gradually relaxed, allowing herself to enjoy the music and the strong arms that held her. "You're a natural," Flynn said softly, close to her ear. Only because you're leading, Harriet laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. On my own, I'd be treading on toes and apologizing constantly. I doubt that very much. His eyes never left hers. You underestimate yourself, Harriet Mason. The evening passed in a happy blur. They danced several more times, enjoyed refreshments, and chatted with townspeople who seemed suddenly eager to make Flynn's acquaintance, and by extension, Harriet's. Even the mayor stopped to converse with them, treating Harriet with a deference she'd never before experienced. During a pause in the dancing, Flynn suggested they step outside for some fresh air. The night was perfect, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of prairie flowers. Are you enjoying yourself? Flynn asked as they strolled along the boardwalk beside the town hall. More than I can say. Harriet's eyes shone in the moonlight. I've never had such a wonderful evening. Flynn stopped walking and turned to face her. Neither have I. There was something in his voice, a deeper note that made Harriet's pulse quicken. They stood close enough that she could see the tiny flecks of gray in his blue eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his tall frame. Harriet, he began, then hesitated. There's something I need to tell you. Fear clutched at her heart. This was at the moment when he would confess that this had all been some elaborate charade. She braced herself, determined not to cry when he revealed the truth. The cattle drive leaves for Grand Island on Wednesday, Flynn continued, but I find myself reluctant to go. This wasn't what she'd expected. What do you mean? Flynn reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. I mean that in just a few days you've become important to me, more important than I thought possible. Harriet's breath caught, but we hardly know each other. Sometimes a man knows when something is right. Flynn's thumb traced small circles on her palm. I'd like the chance to know you better, Harriet, to see where this might lead. But you'll be gone, she whispered. Your life is in Texas. My life is wherever I choose to make it. Flynn's gaze was steady. I've been thinking of settling down, starting a small ranch of my own. Nebraska has good land, I'm told. Hope dangerous, beautiful hope bloomed in Harriet's chest. You're not teasing me. Instead of answering with words, Flynn bent his head and gently, reverently, pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was brief but perfect, a promise, a beginning. When he pulled away, Harriet touched her fingers to her lips in wonder. Her first kiss, and it had been everything she'd secretly dreamed a kiss should be. Does that answer your question? Flynn asked softly. Before she could respond, the town hall door opened, spilling light and laughter into the night. A group of revelers emerged, forcing Harriet and Flynn to step apart. We should go back inside, Harriet said, suddenly aware of how their absence might be noticed. Flynn offered his arm once more. As you wish, though I'd rather have you all to myself. The remainder of the evening passed too quickly. They danced until the final notes faded away, then Flynn escorted Harriet home through the quiet streets of Willow Creek. At her door, he kissed her hand with old-fashioned courtesy. May I call on you tomorrow? He asked. Perhaps we could ride out to the creek after church. I'd like that very much. As Harriet prepared for bed that night, she felt as though she were floating. The evening replayed in her mind the dancing, the conversations, the kiss that had changed everything. For the first time, she looked at her reflection and didn't see a plain, unremarkable woman. Instead, she saw someone worthy of love. Flynn was true to his word. After church the next day, he appeared at the Mason's door, having exchanged his Sunday best for more practical riding clothes. Dr. Mason gave his blessing for their outing, reminding them to be back before sunset. They rode side by side along the creek that gave the town its name, talking easily about their lives, hopes, and dreams. Flynn spoke of his years as a cowboy, the hardships and adventures of the trail. Harriet shared stories of growing up as the doctor's daughter, her mother's early death, and her own ambitions to perhaps study nursing someday. You'd make an excellent nurse, Flynn said as they dismounted near a pretty clearing by the water. You have the right temperament, calm, observant, compassionate. Harriet spread the small blanket she'd brought while Flynn tethered the horses. Father has always encouraged me, but I've never been brave enough to leave Willow Creek. Sometimes the bravest thing is staying where you are and creating the life you want. Flynn settled beside her on the blanket. Other times, it's having the courage to go where your heart leads you. The afternoon passed in pleasant conversation and shared confidences. Flynn told her about his family in Texas, his widowed mother, his schoolteacher sister, the younger brother who managed their small family ranch. "They'd like you," he said with certainty. "Especially my mother. She's always saying I need someone sensible to keep me grounded." "Am I sensible?" Harriet asked, smiling. "Sensible, yes, but also passionate about the things that matter to you." Flynn's fingers intertwined with hers. "I admire that about you, Harriet. You care deeply about your father's patience, about doing things properly, about making a difference in people's lives." His understanding of her character, of aspects of herself that most people in Willow Creek never noticed, touched Harriet deeply. Here was someone who truly saw her, not just her plain exterior. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they reluctantly packed up and mounted their horses for the ride back to town. Approaching Willow Creek, they passed several large cattle herds grazing on the outskirts. Flynn's Texas Longhorns waiting for the final leg of their journey. "Will you really stay in Nebraska after delivering the cattle?" Harriet asked, the question that had been lingering in her mind all day. Flynn nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been trailing cattle for 8 years now. It's a young man's game, hard on the body and harder on the soul. Time I put down some roots. But what about your family in Texas? They'll understand. My brother James has the ranch well in hand. Mother has been after me for years to settle down with a good woman." His eyes met hers, warm with affection. "Of course, I never expected to find her in a small Nebraska town." Harriet's heart skipped a beat at the implication of his words. "Flynn Blackwood, we've known each other less than a week. Aren't you being rather presumptuous?" His laughter rang out across the prairie. "Perhaps. But when something's right, it's right. Don't you feel it too?" The truth was, she did. Despite the brevity of their acquaintance, Harriet felt a connection with Flynn that defied explanation. It wasn't just gratitude for his attention or pleasure at being courted for the first time. It was deeper, a sense of recognition, of finding someone who understood her in ways others never had. "Yes," she admitted softly, "but it still seems too good to be true." "Then let me prove it to you day by day." Flynn's expression grew serious. "I'm not asking for promises yet, Harriet. Just the chance to court you properly once I return from Grand Island." They had reached the outskirts of town. Already, curious eyes were watching their approach. Harriet was suddenly conscious of how this looked, her riding alone with Flynn, returning as the sun was setting. "People will talk," she murmured. "Let them." Flynn seemed unconcerned. "I'm not ashamed of my feelings for you." At the doctor's house, Flynn helped Harriet dismount, his hands lingering at her waist slightly longer than necessary. The touch sent a pleasant shiver through her body. "Thank you for a lovely afternoon," she said, suddenly shy. "The pleasure was mine." Flynn's voice dropped lower. "May I call on you tomorrow? I'd be disappointed if you didn't." His smile was answer enough. The following days established a pattern. Flynn would complete his duties with the cattle drive in the mornings, then spend his afternoons and evenings with Harriet. They walked along the creek, shared meals with Dr. Mason, and even attended a lecture on modern medical practices held at the town hall. Word spread quickly through Willow Creek about the serious courtship developing between the doctor's plain daughter and the handsome Texas cowboy. Reactions were mixed. Some expressed genuine pleasure at Harriet's happiness, while others, led by Violet Richardson, declared it a temporary infatuation that would end with Flynn's departure. Harriet did her best to ignore the gossip, focusing instead on the joy of these precious days with Flynn. Yet as Wednesday approached, the day the cattle drive would depart for Grand Island, anxiety began to gnaw at her. What if, once he left, Flynn reconsidered his intentions? What if the promise of return was easier to make than to keep? Tuesday evening found them sitting on the Masons' front porch swing, enjoying the cool night air. Dr. Mason had tactfully retired early, leaving them alone with the stars and fireflies for company. "This time tomorrow you'll be on the trail," Harriet said, unable to keep the sadness from her voice. Flynn's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Just for a few days. The railroad at Grand Island is only 60 miles. Once the cattle are loaded and my men paid, I'll be back. And then..." Flynn turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I intend to speak with your father about courting you officially, with an eye toward marriage if that's what you want." Harriet's heart seemed to stop, then race forward. "Marriage, Flynn, are you certain? We've known each other such a short time, and I'm not. If you say you're not beautiful again, I may have to kiss you to silence such nonsense." Flynn interrupted, his eyes serious despite his teasing tone. "It's not nonsense. I know what I look like. The whole town has reminded me often enough." Flynn's expression darkened. "The town is blind, then. From the moment I first saw you, I thought you were beautiful. Not in the obvious way of women like Violet Richardson, who wear their beauty like a weapon. Your beauty is deeper in the kindness of your eyes, the grace of your movements, the intelligence in your conversation." He touched her cheek gently. "The more I know you, the more beautiful you become to me. And I want to spend years discovering all the ways in which you're beautiful, Harriet Mason." Tears gathered in Harriet's eyes. "No one has ever seen me that way before. Then everyone else has been a fool." Flynn leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "I leave tomorrow, but my heart stays here with you. Will you keep it safe until I return?" "Yes," Harriet whispered. "And I'll give you mine in exchange." His kiss was tender at first, then deepened with a passion that took her breath away. When they finally parted, both were breathless and flushed. "I should go," Flynn said reluctantly. "Early start tomorrow." Harriet nodded, though everything within her cried out for him to stay. "Will you come to say goodbye before you leave? Wild horses couldn't keep me away." Flynn stood, drawing her up with him. "But it won't be goodbye, Harriet, just until we meet again." Morning arrived too quickly. Harriet rose at dawn, donning her new blue dress, the one Flynn had admired at the social. She wanted him to remember her looking her best. The cattle drive was scheduled to depart at 8 o'clock. By 7:30, Harriet was pacing nervously in the front parlor, wondering if Flynn would have time to stop by as promised. Dr. Mason watched her with sympathetic eyes. "He'll come," he assured her. "That young man is as good as his word." At 7:45, hoofbeats sounded on the street outside. Harriet rushed to the window to see Flynn dismounting from his chestnut gelding. He looked every inch the trail boss this morning, leather chaps, sturdy boots, his Stetson pulled low against the morning sun. "Doctor." Mason discreetly excused himself as Flynn knocked on the door. Harriet opened it with hands that trembled slightly. "You came," she said simply. "I promised I would." Flynn removed his hat, revealing hair still damp from washing. His eyes took in her blue dress with evident appreciation. "You look beautiful. I wanted you to remember me this way." Flynn stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Harriet, I would remember you if you were wearing sackcloth. It's not the dress I see, it's you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you, a token to remember me by until I return." Harriet accepted it curiously. Unwrapping the paper revealed a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. "Oh, Flynn, it's lovely. Open it," he urged. Inside was a tiny daguerreotype of Flynn, his expression serious as such photographs required, but his eyes unmistakably warm. On the opposite side was a lock of dark hair tied with thread. "It's not much," Flynn said, suddenly appearing nervous. "But I wanted you to have something tangible to hold on to. It's perfect." Tears threatened again as Harriet closed the locket. "Would you help me put it on?" Flynn's fingers were surprisingly nimble as he fastened the clasp at the nape of her neck. The locket nestled just below her throat, warm against her skin. "There," he said softly. "Now a piece of me stays with you." From outside came the sound of cattle lowing and men calling to one another. The drive was preparing to move out. Flynn's expression grew regretful. "I have to go." Harriet nodded, fighting the urge to cling to him. "How long will you be gone?" "A week at most. The railroad men are expecting us, so loading should go quickly." Flynn took her hands in his. "I'll be back before you know it, and I'll be waiting." Harriet managed a brave smile. "Be careful." "Always am." Flynn kissed her once more, pouring all his unspoken feelings into the embrace. When they parted, both were breathing hard. He stopped himself, shaking his head slightly. "No, I'll say those words when I return, something to look forward to." With visible reluctance, Flynn replaced his hat and stepped back toward the door. "Until we meet again, Harriet Mason." From the porch, Harriet watched him mount his horse and ride toward the gathered herd and cowboys. At the edge of town, he turned in the saddle and raised his hand in a final farewell. Harriet waved back, the silver locket warm against her skin, a promise she would hold onto in the days ahead. The first days after Flynn's departure passed slowly. Harriet threw herself into her duties at the doctor's office, finding comfort in the familiar routine of assisting her father and organizing his records. Evenings were hardest, the hours she had grown accustomed to spending with Flynn now stretched empty before her. "He'll be back soon enough, Doctor." Mason reassured her over dinner on the third night. "Grand Island is not so far, I know." Harriet touched the locket that hadn't left her neck since Flynn placed it there. "It's just, what if he changes his mind? What if, away from Willow Creek, he realizes that I'm not what he truly wants?" Her father set down his fork, regarding her seriously over his spectacles. "Harriet, in all my years as a physician, I've developed a certain insight into human character. Flynn Blackwood is not a man given to casual feelings or empty promises. When he looks at you, he sees beyond the surface to the remarkable woman you are. But no buts." Dr. Mason reached across the table to pat her hand. "Your mother was considered plain by many when I met her, but to me, she was the most beautiful woman in the world." True beauty, true love, they go beyond mere appearance. Harriet smiled gratefully. "I miss her. I wish she could have met Flynn. She would have approved." Dr. Mason's eyes grew distant with memory. "She always said you had a special heart, one that would draw a special man someday." The conversation comforted Harriet, easing some of the anxiety that had plagued her since Flynn's departure. Still, she counted the days until his promised return, touching the locket when doubts threatened to overwhelm her. On the fifth day, a telegram arrived from Grand Island. Mrs. Peterson delivered it personally to the doctor's house, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. "From Mr. Blackwood," she explained, handing the envelope to Harriet. "Came through just this morning." With trembling fingers, Harriet opened the telegram. "Cattle delivered, stop, all well, stop, returning tomorrow on afternoon train, stop, counting hours, until I see you, stop." Flynn relief washed over her like a cool rain after drought. He was coming back tomorrow. The next day dawned cloudy and threatening rain, but nothing could dampen Harriet's spirits. She moved through her morning tasks with renewed energy, humming softly to herself. Even Violet Richardson's pointed remarks when they crossed paths at the general store couldn't penetrate her happiness. "I hear your cowboy is returning today," Violet said, examining a bolt of expensive silk. "Assuming he actually does come back, of course. Men make all sorts of promises when they're distracted. Flynn keeps his promises," Harriet replied simply, selecting a packet of pins. Violet's perfect features arranged themselves into an expression of false sympathy. "Oh, I'm sure he means well, but cowboys are wanderers by nature. You mustn't be too disappointed if he merely passes through on his way somewhere else." In the past, such comments would have planted seeds of doubt in Harriet's mind. Now she merely smiled, her fingers touching the locket beneath her collar. "Thank you for your concern, Miss Richardson. I hope you find the silk you're looking for." She left Violet staring after her, for once without a ready retort. The afternoon train was scheduled to arrive at 4 o'clock. By 3:30, Harriet was dressed in her blue gown, her hair arranged in the soft waves Flynn had admired. Mrs. Collins had helped her prepare, fussing over every detail like a mother hen. "There," the housekeeper said, adjusting a wayward curl. "You look absolutely lovely. That young man won't know what hit him." Dr. Mason insisted on accompanying Harriet to the station. "It's only proper," he explained when she protested that she could go alone. "Besides, I want to welcome Flynn back myself." They arrived at the small depot just as the train whistle sounded in the distance. Harriet's heart began to race. Around them, other townspeople had gathered, some to meet arriving passengers, others simply curious about the doctor's daughter and her returning suitor. The locomotive appeared around the bend, belching smoke and steam as it approached the station. Harriet clutched her father's arm, suddenly nervous. What if Flynn had changed during his absence? What if the connection they'd felt had been a fleeting fancy after all? The train squealed to a halt, and passengers began to disembark. Harriet scanned each face anxiously, searching for Flynn's familiar features. The crowd on the platform grew as more travelers stepped down from the cars, and then she saw him tall and straight, his dark hair visible as he removed his hat upon entering the station. Flynn's eyes searched the gathered people until they found her. The smile that lit his face chased away every doubt Harriet had harbored. He moved toward her with purpose, weaving through the crowd as if no one else existed. Harriet took an involuntary step forward, barely aware of her father's encouraging hand at her back. They met in the center of the platform, oblivious to the curious stares of onlookers. For a moment, neither spoke, the connection between them transcending the need for words. Then Flynn broke the silence. "Harriet," he said, her name a prayer on his lips, "I missed you every minute." "I missed you too," she replied, her voice catching. "So much." Flynn's gaze moved to Dr. Mason, who had approached at a more dignified pace. He extended his hand respectfully. "Dr. Mason." "Thank you for accompanying Harriet. Welcome back, Mr. Blackwood." The doctor shook Flynn's hand firmly. "I trust your business in Grand Island was successful, very much so. The cattle fetched an excellent price." Flynn's eyes returned to Harriet, drawn as if by magnetism. "But I found myself eager to return to more important matters." Dr. Mason cleared his throat. "Well, I imagine you two have much to discuss. Harriet, I'll see you at home for dinner. Mr. Blackwood, you're welcome to join us, of course." After her father discreetly withdrew, Flynn offered Harriet his arm. "Shall we walk? There's something I'd like to show you." They strolled from the station toward the main street, Flynn carrying his saddlebags over one shoulder. Harriet was acutely aware of curious glances following their progress, but for once she didn't mind being the center of attention. "You're wearing the locket," Flynn observed, his eyes warm with pleasure. Harriet touched the silver pendant. "I haven't taken it off since you gave it to me." "Good." Flynn guided her toward the edge of town, where the prairie stretched green and vast beneath the cloudy sky. "Because I meant what it symbolizes, that a piece of my heart stays with you, always." They walked in comfortable silence until they reached a small rise overlooking Willow Creek. From this vantage point, the town looked picturesque and peaceful, smoke rising from chimneys, the church steeple rising above the other buildings. Flynn set down his saddlebags and turned to face Harriet fully. "I did a lot of thinking on the journey to Grand Island and back." "About?" Harriet asked, a small tremor of uncertainty in her voice. "About us, about the future." Flynn took her hands in his. "I know we've known each other a short time by conventional standards, but I've never been one for conventions." He drew a deep breath. "The thing is, Harriet, I've spent years moving from place to place, never feeling truly at home anywhere, until I met you. With you, I feel like I've found where I belong." Harriet's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "What are you saying, Flynn?" Instead of answering immediately, he reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of leaves and flowers. "I had this made in Grand Island," he explained, running his thumb over the intricate design. "The craftsman thought I was crazy, rushing him so. But I couldn't wait." Flynn opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small, perfect diamond set in its center. "It's not elaborate, but it's genuine, like my feelings for you." He sank to one knee on the grassy hillside, holding the ring before him. "Harriet Mason, I love you. I know it's fast, and I know some will say we're rushing, but my heart is certain. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Harriet's eyes, blurring Flynn's beloved face. This moment, one she had never truly believed would come for her, was actually happening. And not with just any man, but with one who saw her true worth, who called her beautiful and meant it. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Flynn Blackwood, I will marry you." Flynn's face broke into a radiant smile as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching what little sunlight broke through the clouds. He rose to his feet and drew her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise of their future together. When they finally parted, Harriet rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "People will talk, you know. They'll say we're being impulsive. Let them talk." Flynn's arms tightened around her. "We know what we've found in each other. What happens now?" Harriet asked, lifting her face to his. "Now, I speak with your father, formally ask for your hand, though I'm fairly certain he expects it." Flynn tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Then, if you're willing, a short engagement while I secure our future. Our future. Flynn nodded, his expression turning serious. I've purchased land, a small ranch about 5 miles west of town. The Jennings place. Old Sam was looking to retire to his daughter's home in Kansas. Harriet gasped. You bought a ranch already. I told you I was serious about staying. Flynn's eyes crinkled with his smile. It's not much yet, the house needs work and the herd is small, but it's a start. Our start, if you'll have it. Of course I'll have it. Harriet's heart felt full to bursting. I don't need a grand house or fine things, just you. Flynn kissed her again, softly this time. You'll have me, Harriet, every day for the rest of our lives. Hand in hand, they walked back toward town, the golden light of approaching sunset breaking through the clouds to illuminate their path. Harriet glanced down at the ring on her finger, still hardly believing its reality. What are you thinking? Flynn asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Harriet smiled, squeezing his hand. I'm thinking that sometimes, the things people believe about you, the labels they give you aren't the truth, and it takes someone with different eyes to see who you really are. You were never plain, Harriet, Flynn said softly. The world just needed the right eyes to see your beauty. As they approached the doctor's house, where they would share their news with her father, Harriet felt a profound sense of gratitude. For Flynn, who had seen beyond appearances to her true self. For her father, who had always believed in her worth. And for the mysterious ways of fate that had brought a Texas cowboy to Willow Creek, Nebraska, and into her life. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, on a perfect autumn day when the prairie grasses had turned golden and the sky stretched endlessly blue above Willow Creek. The church was filled to capacity, some guests genuinely happy for the couple, others simply curious about the union between the doctor's plain daughter and the handsome Texan rancher. Harriet wore a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Collins had labored over for weeks, declaring it would be her masterpiece. The design was elegant in its simplicity, accentuating Harriet's slender figure and complementing her natural beauty. Her brown hair was arranged in soft curls, adorned with tiny white flowers and a delicate veil. Dr. Mason's eyes misted as he prepared to walk his daughter down the aisle. You look just like your mother on our wedding day, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She would be so proud of the woman you've become. Thank you, Father. Harriet kissed his cheek. For everything. The music began, Mrs. Peterson at the organ, playing the traditional wedding march. The congregation rose as Harriet appeared at the back of the church on her father's arm. But Harriet saw only Flynn waiting for her at the altar, his expression one of absolute wonder and love. As she moved toward him, Harriet was aware of whispers among the guests, the same whispers that had followed her all her life. But today they held a different note. She looks beautiful, someone murmured. Never noticed before, but she really is lovely. That dress is perfect for her. They make a handsome couple. Harriet smiled to herself. It wasn't that she had changed, it was that Flynn's love had given her the confidence to let her inner beauty shine through. And once it did, even those who had dismissed her as too plain were beginning to see her differently. When she reached the altar, Dr. Mason placed her hand in Flynn's with a mixture of joy and wistfulness. Flynn's fingers closed around hers, warm and reassuring. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, he whispered for her ears alone as the minister began the ceremony. They spoke their vows clearly and confidently, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days. When Flynn slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, Harriet felt tears of happiness threatening to spill over. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Flynn didn't wait for permission to kiss his bride. He gathered Harriet into his arms and kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception was held at the town hall, transformed with autumn flowers and ribbons for the occasion. Even Violet Richardson offered congratulations, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she examined Harriet's ring. You certainly worked quickly, she commented. Most courtships last longer than a few weeks. When it's right, you know it, Harriet replied serenely. Flynn and I didn't see any reason to wait. Violet's gaze drifted to where Flynn was conversing with Dr. Mason and the mayor. Well, I suppose some people are lucky that way, finding someone who appreciates them. For the first time, Harriet detected something beneath Violet's perfect exterior, a loneliness, perhaps, or envy not of Harriet's husband, but of the love they shared. The right person will come along for you too, Violet, Harriet said gently. Someone who sees the real you. Violet's eyes widened slightly in surprise at the kindness, then she nodded once before moving away through the crowd. The celebration continued well into the evening, with dancing, speeches, and enough food to feed half the county. As twilight fell, Flynn found Harriet amid a group of well-wishers and drew her aside. "Ready to see our home, Mrs. Blackwood," he murmured against her ear. Her new name sent a pleasant shiver through Harriet. "Yes, I believe I am." They made their goodbyes amid cheers and good-natured teasing. Outside, Flynn had a surprise waiting, a new buggy with a fine bay horse, decorated with ribbons and flowers. "Our first wedding gift to ourselves," he explained, helping her up, "for trips to town and church." The drive to their ranch took about 20 minutes, the road illuminated by a bright harvest moon. As they approached, Harriet could make out the silhouette of a sturdy farmhouse against the night sky, with light glowing from the windows. "I thought we'd arrive to a dark house," she said, puzzled. Flynn smiled mysteriously. "I had some help getting things ready." He pulled the buggy to a stop before the front porch and came around to help Harriet down, but instead of allowing her to walk to the door, he swept her into his arms. "Flynn," she laughed, clinging to his neck. "What are you doing?" "Carrying my bride over the threshold, of course." He climbed the steps easily, bearing her weight as if it were nothing. "It's tradition." At the door, he paused. "Welcome home, Harriet Blackwood." The interior of the house took Harriet's breath away. While not large, it was warm and inviting, with a cheerful fire burning in the stone fireplace. Fresh flowers stood in vases on tables, and new curtains hung at the windows. The furnishings were simple but good quality: a comfortable sofa, several chairs, a sturdy dining table with chairs. "How did you manage all this?" Harriet asked as Flynn set her gently on her feet. "You've been with me almost every day." "I had accomplices," Flynn grinned. "Your father, Mrs. Collins, and a few of my men from the cattle drive who stayed on to work the ranch. They've been secretly preparing for days." Tears filled Harriet's eyes as she took in the care and thought that had gone into creating their first home. "It's perfect." Flynn took her hand, leading her through the house. "There's more." The kitchen was fully equipped with a new cookstove, dishes, and all the necessities. Upstairs, the master bedroom featured a beautiful 4-poster bed with a handmade quilt in shades of blue. "Mrs. Collins made the quilt," Flynn explained. "Said blue was your color." Harriet ran her fingers over the intricate stitching. "It's beautiful." Flynn stepped closer, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "Not half as beautiful as you." She turned in his embrace to face him, suddenly shy despite the weeks of courtship. "I still can't believe this is real, that you chose me." "Believe it." Flynn's voice deepened as he lifted her chin with gentle fingers. "I'll spend the rest of my life showing you how much I love you, Harriet Blackwood." His kiss was different from those they'd shared before, deeper, more urgent, filled with promises of the night to come. Harriet responded with equal passion, her earlier shyness melting away in the heat of their embrace. Later, as moonlight streamed through the bedroom window, Harriet lay in the circle of Flynn's arms, her head resting on his chest. His heartbeat was strong and steady beneath her ear, his breathing deep and even in sleep. She smiled in the darkness, filled with a contentment she had never imagined possible. The plain girl from Willow Creek had found her place in the world not through changing herself to meet others' expectations, but by being truly seen and loved for exactly who she was. Life on the Blackwood Ranch quickly established its own rhythm. Flynn rose before dawn each day to tend to the cattle and horses, often returning to the house for breakfast with Harriet before continuing his work. Harriet managed the household, planted a vegetable garden, and began keeping chickens for eggs and meat. They rode into town each Sunday for church, staying afterward to have dinner with Dr. Mason. The doctor beamed with pride at their happiness, though he admitted to missing Harriet's presence in his home and practice. "The house seems too quiet without you," he confessed one Sunday afternoon as they sat on his porch, "though Mrs. Collins keeps me well fed and organized." "You should come to the ranch more often," Harriet urged. "Your room is always ready, and the fresh air would do you good." Dr. Mason promised to visit when his patient load allowed. As they were preparing to leave that day, he drew Flynn aside for a private word while Harriet gathered her belongings. "Is everything all right?" she asked when they rejoined her, noticing both men looked unusually serious. "Perfect," Flynn assured her, helping her into the buggy. "Your father was just sharing some medical advice." It wasn't until they were halfway home that Flynn explained further. "He wanted to discuss the possibility of grandchildren," he said, a slight flush coloring his tan cheeks. "Wanted to make sure you were healthy enough for motherhood after that bout of pneumonia you had as a child." Harriet felt her own face warm, and his conclusion, that we should have no difficulties starting a family whenever we're ready. Flynn glanced at her, his expression suddenly vulnerable. "Do you want children, Harriet? We've never really discussed it." "Very much," she admitted, "though the thought of being responsible for a new life is somewhat terrifying." Flynn reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You'll be a wonderful mother, and we'll learn together day by day." 3 months after their wedding, as winter settled over the Nebraska prairie, Harriet's monthly cycle failed to appear. She waited another week before mentioning it to Flynn, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely. When she finally told him her suspicions one evening as they sat before the fire, his reaction was everything she could have wished. Joy, wonder, and tenderness crossed his face in rapid succession before he gathered her into a careful embrace. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." Dr. Mason confirmed the pregnancy the following week, estimating that the child would arrive in late summer. "Perfect timing," he declared. "The worst of the heat will be passed by then." The months of waiting passed in a blend of anticipation and preparation. Flynn expanded the small nursery adjacent to their bedroom, crafting a cradle from cherry wood and building shelves for the baby's things. Harriet sewed tiny garments and quilted a blanket, embroidering it with flowers and birds. As her body changed, growing rounder with the new life within, Harriet sometimes caught Flynn watching her with an expression of absolute wonder. "What are you thinking?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch, enjoying the spring twilight. "That you've never been more beautiful," he replied without hesitation. "You're glowing, Harriet," she laughed, placing his hand on her swollen belly where the baby kicked vigorously. "I'm as big as a barn, perfect in every way." Flynn leaned over to kiss her softly. "I fall more in love with you each day." Their son was born on a warm August night in 1875, after a labor that left Harriet exhausted but triumphant. Dr. Mason delivered his grandson himself, pronouncing the 8-pound boy healthy and strong. "He has your eyes," Harriet whispered to Flynn as he held their child for the first time, his big hands cradling the tiny form with infinite gentleness, "and your determined chin." Flynn's voice was thick with emotion. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one. Now, looking at the perfect little face, Harriet knew. "Henry Edward Blackwood," she said. "For my grandfather and my father." Flynn nodded his approval. "A good, strong name for a good, strong boy." Little Henry thrived under his parents' devoted care. Harriet discovered that motherhood, while challenging, felt natural to her. Flynn proved to be an attentive father, often carrying the baby in a sling across his chest while he worked around the ranch house. As autumn painted the prairie in russet and gold, Harriet sat on the porch one afternoon, nursing Henry while watching Flynn mend a fence in the yard. Contentment washed over her, a feeling of rightness, of being exactly where she belonged. Flynn looked up, catching her eye across the distance. The love in his gaze was as powerful as it had been the first time he'd called her beautiful. He set down his tools and walked toward her, his stride purposeful. "What is it?" Harriet asked as he climbed the steps to join her. Flynn sat beside her on the porch swing, slipping an arm around her shoulders and gazing down at their son's peaceful face as he nursed. "I was just thinking," he said softly, "about the day I rode into Willow Creek with that cattle drive. How I nearly collided with a young woman carrying packages, and how that moment changed everything." Harriet leaned her head against his shoulder. If you hadn't stopped to help me that day, I would have found another way to meet you. Flynn pressed a kiss to her temple. Some things are meant to be, Harriet. You and me, this life we're building, it was always our destiny. As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Harriet Blackwood knew with absolute certainty that Flynn was right. Their love had been destined from the moment he'd seen past her plain exterior to the beauty within. And in his eyes, she would always be the most beautiful woman he had ever seen.